Welcome to the Talent Revolution. I'm Jill Caniglio-Kirk.
And I'm Joe Shambon. You know what, Jill? I was thinking about what should we talk about today, and I think it was continuing our, dating situation and analogy from the episode before. What do you think?
Yeah, that was our episode about interviewing.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's great to continue the conversation. So what comes after dating, Joe?
Well, I would say it's moving in together, right? So we've got to accept the offer and let's move in.
Moving in after the offer to me means orientation, right? And onboarding. So I think
Absolutely.
that's a
But don't forget about pre-boarding.
true, very true. We want to keep that excitement and that engagement up, right? So that's a really important part of the conversation. But let's get into it.
So what do you think pre-boarding is?
Well, I think pre-boarding is really that period between, accepting the offer and your first day. And it's an important time just because you have to capitalize on that candidate's excitement. You kind of go through this, I'm excited, I accepted the offer, now kind of everything drops, right? So, I think it's an important period of time for the organization to try to stay in touch with the candidate, perhaps send them, some um, handcrafted notes about what to expect. Perhaps the hiring manager reaches out during that period, letting them know they're excited about them joining and maybe giving them a little snapshot of what is to come in their first few weeks on the job.
Absolutely. And in my experience, it's also really interesting culturally across the globe on that time period, right? And working through visas, working through location, the notice periods, those really change by region and by country. So you got to be really careful. And that pre boarding gets really important. So therefore, they don't lose interest and they are ensure they're excited and they're going to show up on day one, right? That's the biggest concern.
Sure. And, you bring up a good point because there's a lot of practical matters that need to be thought through and lined up to make sure everything comes together smoothly for day one. So, in addition to the practicalities, like you said, it might be visas, it may be background checks, right? Certain things that need to happen during that period in communication. I think it's also important to keep in touch with the candidate just to kind of keep up that conversation, right? And to kind of talk about painting that picture of joining the organization and making them feel part of things even before
So
they've joined.
So this is the age-old question, and I'm sure the people that are listening and will be curious on our thoughts. Who owns that? Who owns pre-boarding? If you take the recruiter, sometimes they're like, "Hey, guess what? I'm done." Right? They accepted the offer. I think every organization's a little different with the size and scope that they have. Sometimes there is onboarding folks. Sometimes there's a people operations team. Sometimes it moves to HR. Some people put it on the manager. But I mean, what have you seen in your career?
Well, number one, I think some points we brought up in previous episodes where we talked about alignment and getting everybody on the same page. I think the same holds true for pre-boarding. I don't know that there's a right or wrong. It depends on what fits your organization. But I think as long as you have alignment with the manager, talent acquisition, and HR as to who's doing what, and it's all part of a shared process and we all understand each other's roles, that there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to go about it. It's really about having that clear communication and alignment so that we all know what's happening.
I will still take the stance as a recruiter, at least in my experience, is I'm always going to stay in touch with that person to ensure that their butt is in seat. And, whether it's just text messages, phone calls, the emails, and on the recruiting side, it's always being CC'd or followed through that communication piece as you're sending in that paperwork and different other mediums that you're going to keep the person interested. The recruiter wants to know what's happening, so therefore they can ensure that the flow and the information is coming across that way. And so I would say, most of the time the recruiter, in my opinion, owns that communication plan, but there's other folks that would typically play pieces into that, right? With the onboarding paperwork and the background checks, the drug screens, or whatever your company is going to go through,
Right.
and a lot of that medium of different things. But definitely the hiring manager needs to be in touch. That phone call afterwards of congratulations, looking forward. I've seen it where even we've set up lunches for the person to go out there and meet them. Sometimes candidates have to relocate, so you're working through a lot of
Sure.
different processes as you go through there, but you got to keep that excitement up on the pre-boarding. And I think people miss it because sometimes it's like, hey, they've accepted, great, see you in 2 weeks or whatever that notice period is. And you got to get really careful that you don't lose that momentum. And, nobody wants to have that call on, because most people start on Monday, that Sunday night phone call, hey, listen, I'm not coming. And nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that, that's for sure. And I'll just say there's something that stands out in my mind that really left a lasting impression on me. And I was joining a new position, and I actually got a call from my boss's boss the weekend
Mhm.
before I joined. And, you know, it's very unusual to get a call on a weekend from someone at that level, right?
Right.
And it was really, "Hey, we're really excited. We can't wait to see you." It was very brief. It was very, not a big deal, but just that personal touch really left a lasting impression on me and really made me feel, really wanted and really excited about starting. So I think, it's important to think about as we reflect what can we do to make sure we keep candidates excited about this journey with the new company. Like you said, we're starting a new relationship, right? We want to get started off on the right foot. And I think the hiring manager plays an important role in that process. But there was an example of another person that took the time and really definitely set the tone for me starting feeling, part of this leadership team. So
Goes back to our candidate experience and communication. So
right.
full circle, everyone. Hopefully, you're catching that on. The next is obviously, we've decided to move in together, but it's a moving day. So what happens on orientation? I mean, what's your thoughts on orientation? Because there's lots of them, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, number one, I think we should be upfront with people as to what to expect, if not their first day, their first week.
Hmm.
So we can kind of set up those expectations with people. Because there is a lot of necessary things that need to happen that aren't so exciting. And sometimes those are all crammed in on the first day, right? So I think letting people know what to expect, how long those things are going to take, is the right approach. And that way, they're not disappointed about, gee, I didn't get to meet the team or I didn't get to spend any time with my boss the first day, right? And I think there's also ways we can look at taking some of those practical things and making them a little bit maybe quicker and easier. Automating some of those things, using thumb drives, right? Trying to just see how we can move that process along a little bit more quickly so we can mix in some of those practical matters with some other things that are maybe more cultural immersion, right? Some videos, perhaps, some, in orientation. One thing I know that I've liked to do is bring in a top leader that might be working in
Hmm.
that location and like a personal little chat with a small group of people just to kind of blend in some more exciting things to that first day for people. So,
Yeah, I'm with you on the automation piece. And I've been at one place where most of all the paperwork was done before I even got there. So, when you get there, a lot of in the US, most folks, you have to fill out these tax forms and these different things. And it's like, well, what do I want to do? And they're rushing you trying to through, and you want to get this done because they want to be able to then put you in the system and get things going. But I was at a company and two companies ago where that was all done ahead of time. So you're able to make those decisions, sit down with your partner, go through that side of it.
mhm.
Therefore, it's just the simple, because there is some legal ones that you need to sign face to face with witnesses and different things that go on, where that stuff was all taken care of, which was awesome, right?
Right.
To be able to get to orientation. I think orientation is we've already made the experience throughout the whole, reach out and interview and all that side of it, but this is the showing off of your home, right? Hopefully
Hmm.
it's in person, and you're there, right? And a lot of the times it's multiple people, right? So hopefully it's not too big so you can still keep it personable, in my opinion, right? Keeping it that way. I've been at a place where there was, I can't remember now, what,
Like
30,
an
40
auditorium.
people. Well,
Right.
yeah, it felt like that, right? And it's like it was okay, and I get what they were trying to do and what they have to do, but it wasn't very personable on that morning of what I had to go do. And then it's like, here's your stuff, goodbye. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay. And, you know, I would have loved to give them some suggestions, and I changed it for certain things for when we worked into our division of it. But it's the show off of your home, right? So I think the keys on an orientation is obviously, you know, what give us a bigger tour, a little bit more of where everything is,
Mhm.
understand where you sit, get your equipment, and get a good understanding. Right, where's the bathroom? Where do I get coffee? Understand that, meet the team, and really get that home feeling so it's comfortable when you come in day two and it's not
Mhm.
looking like a deer in headlights.
Right. And make sure people, if you haven't planned lunch for them,
Right.
hopefully you've planned lunch for them or you've planned to have a colleague in their team, maybe somebody that you assigned to be their mentor, take them to lunch, right? I always like to, you know, make sure there's some introduction to some of their colleagues as part of orientation, right? Where it's not all kind of, you're now part of the HR team, right? Sitting here with HR all day. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've done it before where I brought in marketing, I brought in the IT, I brought in the facilities, and then the HR, and then, really grasping all the aspects of the company and going through the overviews. And, that first week is really critical, but you've got to look beyond that first week, right? Those 30, 60, 90 plus days of, I call that still orientation, right? You're still getting situated and acclimated, but assigning a buddy or a partner or a mentor besides the boss, right? That gives them someone else to talk to be able to go to. I've done some other things, and we can get to that in the stories afterwards. But really, you want to lay out a lot of those introductions, those systems. And the most impressive, if you ever have it, is your IT equipment's all there, your email's all set up, you're able to go, you're able to log in and get starting to be familiar with your new home, right? And that's that
right.
whole analogy piece.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to get day one especially right. And like you said, have tools available for people, have their desk ready for them, make them feel welcome. Like you said, this is kind of we're showing off our home, we're welcoming you, and making sure that's done really well and top notch.
Yeah, I did it where, I ensured that we had to get the equipment out and the request out. They had their nameplate on their desk, right? So it was truly set up. Now, obviously, business cards and different things that may or may not, if those are needed, but as much as possible to go, wow, like getting that wow factor, right? That's what you're really looking for from that can. Go, they really like this, and I've seen many pictures, especially on LinkedIn, where they say, look, it's my first day, and then you can see a picture of a laptop and a bag or a cup or
Hmm.
that's there's a pride, right? You're joining this company and you're feeling excited and proud of it. Show it off, right? And the company has to be able to do that as well. And it's what's critical, right? I mean, it's the you don't want to see the bad stuff. You want to see all the good things and be able to show off.
Yeah, and truthfully, let's be honest, first impressions really matter. We know every person's coming home to a family member who's saying, "Tell me about your first day."
Yep.
And you don't want the story to be like, "Well, you're not going to believe this. I didn't have a desk or I didn't have a computer and they spelled my name wrong," right? You don't want to be that person. So, it takes some double checking to make sure everything's right, but you definitely want to get the day one right and make sure that person feels important, goes home and tells a great story about, I'm excited to go in on day two, right? And find out what's next.
And that's when you take a step back and you really, as the HR or TA or combination, really decide who owns what in each steps of the process, right? Big or small companies, guys, think about it. Who owns the pieces? Who's going to then drive that? And then, make that experience appropriate. And unfortunately, you have to be that conductor, whoever that is, to ensure that all those things are happening, right? It does IT have the information needed to be able to get the equipment? Does facilities have that? Is the manager set up? Is the plan? And that's the next piece on getting into onboarding. Onboarding is that next period, right? Of those, I say at 30, 60, 90 are the big critical ones, but you still got to look at 6 months and a year down the road of, have you fully onboarded this person and are they acclimated to the organization?
Right. And another piece of that is really the culture. I think it's great to have prepared materials for people, but I think it's also important to tell them what things are really like. And to have someone who is like helping fill in those blanks for people, I think that makes a huge difference in helping people assimilate to this is how people do things here, right? Or most people go
Mhm.
out to lunch, or they sit at their desk and eat lunch, right? Just kind of the informal things about, you know, this is kind of the way things are here, right? I think everyone needs that.
Absolutely, and you said a word that, some people tell me it sounds bad, but it makes sense. Assimilate, right?
Hmm.
My story actually into this whole thing was one of company's book before I created from. It wasn't my brainchild; it was someone else. But I took it to fruition and executed on it. Was an assimilation plan, is that's what we called it, and it was truly all the tools, systems, processes, locations, people that this person coming into this department would need to understand and go through. And it was literally a printed piece of paper that the candidate, that the new hire would get, and the hiring manager. And actually, we had the sign off on it. And we did it for
Hmm.
90 days, but it was
Right.
that 30, 60, 90. So it included training, overviews of what they should be covering to understand. And it gave them the names and locations and places, again, that would then be that self-guided plan that they need to then go do, right? Or ask,
Hmm.
what is this and how do I get to this information? And it was all of the new hires were like, wow, oh, okay, this is really cool. And it gave them the ownership to be able to then go tackle it themselves, but it
Right.
gave them a little bit of that roadmap, right? It was that legend and pathways to be able to then partially get assimilated into the organization.
Yeah, and it sounds like what you had there was really something that also helped them connect with other people,
Mhm.
understand how other people fit in the organization, and understand maybe how they're going to interact with one another, which I think is a huge aspect of really getting someone up and running and getting them functioning, right? Um, I think doing that in the right way, as far as, making sure their role is clear to them, they understand where they fit in the organization, they've met their, coworkers, their team members, they understand who their cross-functional partners are, right? All of that's really critical to making sure that you have a person who can contribute and that really comes up to speed.
Yeah, and, thinking about it, there was definitely ways to enhance that, right? By maybe laying out more about the role. And I think because I seen this later on, actually setting up those conversations maybe for the first week or these introductions instead of just naming names. I think there was I could have taken it a little bit further thinking
Right.
about it more now. And I think the times were different. I mean, this was 10 plus years ago,
Mhm.
but it was a great foundation, and then I've applied that to others. So you can, again, you have to keep iterating it. And I'll go back to that other example at the same company. Orientation used to be 4 hours, and then I took it to an all day thing, but then I took it to 2 half days, right? Because
Mhm.
there was a lot of information, but people wanted to get excited, right? So I
Right.
know I'm skipping into some of the stories and the pieces here, but it fit in because it's the evolution of your organization and what needs to happen. And that's what everyone has to understand. It's not set. You don't have to be best in class right away. You have to take steps to make that experience and to get them acclimated in the best way possible for your organization.
Yeah, and to your point, Joe, you can hit it out of the ballpark and hit a grand slam on day 1 and then just kinda, like, walk away, and then the person still may fail, right? Because
Right.
there's nothing you can do in one day to really set somebody up for success. So I think what you're saying is so critical and important that it's really a series of steps and building blocks and follow up that is essential to really making things happen and doing a good job in getting that person onboarded.
What about your experience? What have you seen for an onboarding orientation in your experience?
What I would say is I think HR and, TA owning that process together and HR maybe taking the lead on from day 1 has worked well. But I think a really important aspect of it is ensuring that there's a roadmap for managers as to what is their role in the process. And not only telling them what their role is, but maybe doing some follow up with them to make sure it's happening. Because I think the last thing you want is people having inconsistent experiences across the organization where one department's, having a different experience. Managers are spending time with employees, another department where that's not happening. So I think, HR's role is to really, like you said, be that conductor. And, maybe they take some personal time up front, but it's really important that they also work with managers to even get feedback on, is
Mhm,
what
yeah.
we've set up working, right? Do you need more help? And I know some practical things I've done in my career is really had managers, appoint maybe a point person in their department that would be kind of the mentor to all new people coming in. That's worked well for certain organizations. And then in others, they'd like to pick a special, like one person mentor who's going to be the mentor to the employee, and just that person that um, you can go to with any questions, right? They might walk you through interdepartmental procedures. And when you had just a simple question as you're, starting your job responsibilities, you can go to that person, not feeling like you always had to go to the boss, right?
Right.
And I think that's a really nice thing that every organization can offer. And it's a nice thing for employees to have. I think it helps forge a nice friendship. It makes people feel a little bit more at ease than having to go to their boss all the time. And that certainly worked well in my experience. And I find that there's certain people that just love being in positions like that where they can help other people, help them get started. And I would say if you're looking for people like that, they're generally the person who is kind of your culture ambassador. They kind of wear your logo on their sleeve, and they kind of embody what your company culture is. So I think you want to be thoughtful about having the right representation. And I'll say that not every employee is a great mentor, right? We all know that we want someone that's going to model the best behaviors and, be helpful and be accessible and all those types of things. Those are some things that I've done that have worked well. And then I would also say some things I've done is really have follow-up meetings and bring, new employees back together maybe after 2 weeks, right? And kind of
Mm,
get some feedback, have some
creative.
dialogue with them, right? And then, be able to kind of still follow up on, okay, how are we doing? Are there any things we can do to kind of make this a better experience or make sure that things are moving along? So I think keeping that dialogue going is also something that I found is really helpful. So,
What are your thoughts in the differentiation for executive onboarding versus professional onboarding? Have you seen any special, I hate saying special treatment, but sometimes there is an enhanced hands-on plan that goes into place for some of those
yeah,
executives?
I would say when it comes to onboarding an executive, it generally is a more comprehensive plan where maybe they're visiting multiple locations, right? And there's maybe a calendar put together for them as to, who are the key people they need to meet. There's probably a lot more individual planning and getting those calendar meetings booked, whether they're in person or face to face, right? So I would
Right.
say, overall it's similar, but it may be a little bit more comprehensive or detailed for an executive joining the company because of, the number of relationships they're going to have with other higher level leaders that might be a little less accessible. They might be more geographically dispersed, and that may, create some more coordination that's required.
Yeah, and that's I think what everyone needs to understand. It's not special treatment. It's really, it's there's a lot more coordination that has to go on with all the different players involved, which ends up making it more hands-on and detailed into that aspect of things.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I've honestly found that sometimes a good mentor for a new executive is your last newest executive, because sometimes the
Oh
people that
yeah,
have been there the longest, like, don't even really kind of, they know things like the back of their hands, but they may not be the best person to explain it to somebody just because it's second nature to them, right?
right.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. Um, so how do we measure that we actually did a good job? I mean, we measure everything in HR and talent acquisition as much as possible. So what do we think that we could do for onboarding, pre-boarding, orientation? How do we measure that?
I think lots of companies do surveys, right? So that's one way, ask people for feedback. I think another is to see like how well are people working, right? I would say when you're doing a good job with onboarding and you're doing all of this in the right way, people come up to speed pretty quickly and they become pretty proficient and they're able to focus on their job, right? I know that's not the easiest thing in the world to measure, but I would say if I were doing a 90-day review with a manager about someone's performance that just joined the company, which is something I like to do, as as an HR person, and have a touch point with the manager, and ask them to do a 90-day review with the employee in conjunction, and they tell me that things are going well, then to me that is also a report card, so to speak, on how was the onboarding experience.
I think that's a big metric that I've always been trying to measure, and I think there's many different ways out there, and I haven't really researched it a lot. Quality of hire, right? I know
Hmm.
it's necessarily not it's a piece of it, right? It's getting them up to speed. Did they acclimate? Did they fit in? Did they actually, make that impact that they're looking at inside of it and measuring it, to be able to do those things? That's one of the big metrics that I've always found interesting and wanting to tackle in my career, and I still haven't done that yet, but
Yeah,
it's on my to-do list.
there's actually some staggering statistics out there on effective onboarding programs. I was reading this article from Brandon Hall Group that talked about having an effective onboarding program can improve your employee productivity by 70%, which is just staggering to me, right? 70% is
Oh,
a big number. And, you know, it just kind of highlights why it's important to invest in this process. And, time is money. And I think if people don't come up to speed and feel like they're kind of doing the work that they anticipated doing, they kind of lose interest, right? And there's also a staggering number of people that leave jobs in 90 days, right?
right. Yeah,
I mean,
turnover is a big piece, right? That, regrettable turnover and within the first year. I mean, 90 days is fast, but I
mhm.
haven't met too many that haven't met, some companies got away from probation periods, but that less than 90 days, I haven't met too many that haven't achieved that, but that would be a huge metric. And then the first year.
Right, right.
And I think we'll be able to quote that company and put that in the comments when we post, for everyone to be able to check out that article. Um, you know, what other any other metrics or any other measurement? I mean, surveys I think are a huge piece, and turnover, as we talked about, quality of hire. Has there been any others that you've used in your career, Joe?
Hmm. No, but I would just say that I was surprised. Sometimes I'm cynical about employee surveys. I think if you ask employees in the right way for suggestions, I actually have had a lot of creative things come back, that we've piloted and tried, right? So I think it's a good strategy to ask people for ideas because, we're not always the most creative, and um, who better to ask than the people that are kind of going through the process, right? But there's nothing else I can really think of that I've done outside of those few things. How about you, Joe?
No, it's really a lot of communication. I go back to communication, right? Talking to the new hires, right? Myself, right? Especially being on the inside of an organization. How is it? Are you up to speed? Are you missing anything? Do you understand? And then talking through different pieces, and
Right.
hopefully they're going, yeah, no, I already knew that, or I saw this, or, and then kind of going, well, I didn't know that, or I didn't hear about those things. And those were kind of the notes that I would then personally take back. So it's kind of like that informal survey,
Yeah.
plan that way to be able to go through
Right.
things, that I've kind of done,
Yeah.
for those things.
One of the really good suggestions that came back through surveys to me was someone had this idea where we could create a library of just some commonly asked questions and like
Mm,
kind of on demand type things, right? Um, which turned out to be, something that really worked out well for certain practical things. Um, I met with a person, had a chat with them. They talked about what they thought might help. And what they explained is sometimes when you're going through things at orientation, you don't really need to know it then. And by the time you
right,
need to know it, you don't remember it, right? And you don't know who to ask. So it's kind of more on demand, right? Which makes complete sense. If someone's teaching you where the expense reports are, how to fill one out, but you don't take a trip for 90 days, you're like, oh, I know someone told me that, but I don't remember how to do it, right? So just some simple things like that that came back that I was like, "Hey, we could easily do that. That makes complete sense." You're telling people up front because you're saying eventually you're gonna need to know this, but by the
right.
time they need it, right, it's not practical. So that was a good suggestion that came up, and like I said, we took other ideas like that and built a library where people can go and, get access to the information real time when they needed it. So,
Makes total sense, and I love that idea. I mean, I'll have to, use that in the future. I mean, it's a good FAQ aspect, and intranet usually is where a lot of that stuff's housed, and you got to
Right.
remind people where that actually is. But they
Right.
have to actually go to it. But no, it's great to be able to house that information. And FAQs are, again, you're who uses an expense report on the first week typically, right? So,
Right.
it's there's no need to go through those specific things. What I kind of shared a story. What's one of yours that you've thought about for orientation, pre-boarding, onboarding? Any stories on your side?
I don't have a great story to tell, but I had an aha moment as an HR leader. So I was going through a lot of growth in one company, and it was a number of years ago. And I had a person that was on my team, and her job was to prepare all the orientation materials. So she talked about how frustrating this was. She wanted to start using a printer. Could I get a quote and go outside so I don't have to do all this manual work and get a printer? And I was like, well, why are we even doing this, right? Do people really need this? So we kind of went down the path of just re-engineering and revamping our whole program and making it really like a thumb drive we handed to people.
Oh well.
And basically said, like, here you go. Here's everything. We'll walk through everything with you. But I'm like, yeah, we don't need to give them a binder. Who needs a binder and a piece of paper? And this was maybe 15 plus years ago, right? Um, so, we kind of migrated to kind of being a little more efficient. It certainly saved time in the HR team. We also found that a lot of times when it comes to benefits and certain things, maybe the employee is not the decision maker. Maybe there's,
Right.
someone in their family that is wanting to look at that information anyway. So it turned out to be just a synergy that we found kind of out of frustration, I was trying to keep my HR rep happy, not, getting paper cuts, not having to pay a printer, right? And
Well,
said
right.
like,
It becomes an efficiency and a cost effective, but
yeah.
also you're giving probably branded thumb drives. So, like, hey, look, I get a cool thing, right?
Oh, and honestly, the company I worked for had a really cool image, and we had I won't say who it was, but we had an adorable thumb drive that literally had
Sure.
the logo, and it depicted the whole vibe of the company. You're absolutely right. So not only did we, save time and energy, but it also, you know, we gave the employees something, they liked it. It kind of presented a different image of the company being more current, right? It was a technology company. So it's just a little example of how making a pivot and taking something in a little different direction, I think drove some efficiency and kind of turned out to be a cool thing. So,
Yeah, no, and I'll add into some of those. When I was talking about mine, really is that evolution of that onboarding and orientation where, again, they show up and spent, got their equipment, got a quick tour, and got their badge, and then they were off to go. Versus, an on, day to 2 day, ensuring their computer was set up, their IT was there. And then I enhanced it to having a notebook. And then, of course, that kind of got a little backlash because everyone was like, hey, I didn't get one. But, it was that little trinket of I got a notebook, it has the thing, has a pen, because some people forget all that stuff. I was able to put that assimilation plane inside of there. And you're
yeah,
able to then take it and go, right?
you're right, Joe. People love free stuff. And
They
then
do.
when you give new free stuff to your new employees, all your old employees are like, I want a notebook. Where's my notebook?
Oh my God, we could probably have a whole episode on that conversation too. Yes, but it was well worth it, right? It was well received, and it didn't cause too much backlash because, but because we were doing a ton of hiring. But
Right.
it's that evolution, and that's where you gotta. I think my tale is, and the whole method of the story is really keep iterating, right? There's no perfect way. It's going to continuously change, especially virtual versus live. To I've seen people get gift boxes ahead of time. I've seen, and there's great companies out there that you can select and get home delivered a thing, right? And you could pick a gift and be
Hmm.
able to get that. And sometimes they're branded, and there's a many different ways. And there's no right or wrong. I think it kind of goes to your company culture. What's going to make the most sense? What's the right cost effective plan that you want to put into place? and then try it, right? Try it and see what makes sense, and then ask other people, right? And then see what they've been to. And that's the other nice cool part of all these folks coming into your company. They've all been at other places. What have they done to be able to do that and create your own best in class? Because there is no best in class that I've seen. Talking to everybody, it's all different. And some people take tips and tricks from everywhere, and I think that's what you have to take out of this.
Yeah, one of my favorite words is steal with pride. If you
Yep.
see a good idea, grab it, run with it, and use it or pilot it, right? Sometimes we try things and go, yeah, that didn't fit. And that's okay.
Right. You got to keep, like I said, keep iterating. And I think everyone that's listening, please comment and share your experiences through pre-boarding, onboarding, orientation. I think that'll be a great conversation through the comments to be able to see what everyone else has done in their careers and in their companies.
Yeah, I think, this is definitely an opportunity for, like you said, iteration. And, the truth is, it can have a really huge impact on getting people started in your company, as well as creating a reputation of being a place that people want to be.
Absolutely. Any other final thoughts, Jill?
Nope, I don't think I have anything else.
So, well, thanks everyone for joining. Again, make your pre-boarding, onboarding, and orientation the way you would like it to be. Share in the comments. Please, if you like what you heard, please share and like our podcast and refer a friend to listen in. But really appreciate it. And thank you again.
Thanks. Goodbye.